Vanessa leaned in and whispered, "Who's she?" Jake hesitated, then muttered, "My wife." Vanessa's eyes widened in disbelief. "Your wife?" she hissed, her voice sharp. But before Jake could respond, the lead investor clinked his glass, calling the room to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Carlton began, "before we proceed, I'd like to introduce someone who embodies the values we hold dear: authenticity, integrity, and a commitment to making a difference. Please welcome Emily Harris, founder of the Teach for Tomorrow initiative." The room erupted in applause as Emily stepped forward, her face composed but glowing. Jake's stomach churned as all eyes turned to his wife, and the investors glanced back at him with curious expressions. Emily spoke eloquently about her nonprofit, sharing heartfelt stories of how her organization had transformed the lives of underprivileged children. The audience hung on her every word, moved by her passion and sincerity. One investor leaned toward Jake and whispered, "You're a lucky man to have such an extraordinary wife." Jake forced a tight smile, his discomfort growing. Vanessa, sitting beside him, fidgeted in her chair, her usual confidence faltering under the weight of the moment. As the evening continued, the investors began gravitating toward Emily, engaging her in conversation and praising her work. Vanessa, sensing her diminishing importance, attempted to redirect attention back to herself with light jokes and flirtatious remarks, but they fell flat. The lead investor's wife turned to Vanessa and asked bluntly, "And you are?" Caught off guard, Vanessa stammered, I'm his partner." The woman raised an eyebrow and turned to Jake. "How interesting. I thought Emily was your partner." Jake stammered an incoherent reply, but the damage was done. By the end of the night, Emily had become the star of the event. The investors made it clear they valued her authenticity and vision, and they subtly expressed their disappointment in Jake's lack of transparency. Vanessa, feeling humiliated, excused herself early, leaving Jake alone to face the whispers and judgment of the room. As Emily prepared to leave, she walked past Jake and paused briefly. "You wanted someone to impress them, Jake?" she said softly. "I hope I lived up to your expectations." Emily walked out of the grand ballroom with her head held high, leaving Jake in the wake of his unraveling facade. The cool evening air outside the venue felt liberating, a stark contrast to the tension inside. She had spent years quietly enduring Jake's disregard, but tonight was a turning point, one she hadn't fully anticipated. While Jake was left to field awkward glances and murmurs from the investors, Emily's poise and authenticity left an indelible impression. The investors' wives gathered around her, asking about her nonprofit work, how she started, and the challenges she overcame. "You're an inspiration," one of the women said. "The world needs more people like you." Emily smiled warmly, but didn't linger to bask in the attention. She excused herself politely, knowing her presence had already spoken volumes. Her quiet strength was her power, a strength that Jake had taken for granted for far too long. Inside the ballroom, Jake sat alone at his table, the hum of conversation around him now sharp with the judgment and curiosity. She finished her meal. Sighing slowly, she walked out the door. He replayed the night's events in his head, realizing how thoroughly his plans had backfired. An investor approached him with a glass of wine in hand, sitting down beside him. "Jake," the man said thoughtfully, "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's hiding something. Now, you should have been upfront about your wife. She's an extraordinary woman. If I were you, I'd work hard to make sure she stays in your life." Jake nodded stiffly, his pride preventing him from admitting his mistakes, but the weight of the man's words lingered. Back home, Emily sat in her quiet living room, staring at an old photograph of her and Jake from their early days. In the photo, Jake's arm was wrapped around her, his smile bright and genuine. She thought about the man he used to be, the man who dreamed big but stayed humble. She sighed, setting the photo down. While part of her still loved that version of Jake, she knew the man he had become was no longer the partner she deserved. Meanwhile, Vanessa fumed over the humiliation she had endured. Jake's failure to prepare her for Emily's presence or to defend her when the investors questioned her role left her furious. She sent Jake a curt text. "You should have told me about her. I am done being blindsided." The next day, Emily received an unexpected call from Mr. Carlton, the lead investor. "Emily, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," he began. "Your work with the Teach for Tomorrow initiative is incredible. We'd love to support your cause and explore a partnership." Emily was taken aback, but graciously accepted the offer. By the end of the call, she had secured a significant grant for her nonprofit, along with an invitation to collaborate on a larger scale. For the first time in years, Emily felt seen and valued, not as Jake's wife, but as a leader in her own right. As the days passed, Jake struggled to balance his collapsing image and his growing realization of Emily's importance. He tried reaching out to her with small gestures, offering to pick up dinner, leaving notes of apology, but Emily remained distant. One evening, he sat across from her at the dinner table, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Emily, I know I've made mistakes. I took you for granted, and I let my ambition blind me to what really matters." Emily looked at him, her expression calm but unreadable. "Jake," she said, her voice steady, "I've spent years standing in your shadow, hoping you'd see me. But now I've realized I don't need you to see me. I've always been enough on my own." Staring at the same photograph Emily had looked at the night before, Jake's life seemed to spiral further in the days following the investors' dinner. The once confident real estate mogul now found himself battling the consequences of his decisions. Public whispers began to surface about the tension at the gala, leaving Jake's professional relationships strained. Yet, his stubborn pride kept him from fully acknowledging the damage. Jake's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant. "The investors are asking questions," one text read. "They're concerned about transparency and the lack of alignment in your personal and professional image." Jake clenched his jaw as he read the messages. The investors weren't just questioning his business acumen, they were questioning his character. Determined to salvage the situation, Jake reached out to Mr. Carlton, the lead investor, requesting a private meeting to clarify matters. Mr. Carlton agreed, but offered Jake an ominous warning. "Jake, remember that trust is the foundation of any partnership. If we can't trust you personally, we can't trust you professionally." Meanwhile, Emily's world was transforming in ways she hadn't expected. Her collaboration with the investors' philanthropic arm brought her nonprofit national attention. Interviews and speaking engagements followed, shining a light on her work and the values she stood for. One evening, Emily appeared on a local news segment to discuss her nonprofit. As Jake watched from his office, he felt a pang of regret. The Emily on the screen was radiant and confident, a stark contrast to the woman he had dismissed for so long. "She never needed me," Jake muttered under his breath. For the first time, he realized how much he had underestimated her. As Jake prepared for his VATE meeting with Mr. Carlton, the fallout from the investors' dinner reached its peak. Industry colleagues began to distance themselves, their faith in Jake's integrity shaken by the whispers surrounding the event. At a networking gala, a week after the dinner, Jake arrived alone, his presence no longer commanding the respect it once did. Instead of admiration, he was met with subtle but unmistakable judgment. One colleague approached him with a smirk. "Heard your wife stole the show at Carlton's dinner," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Jake forced a tight smile, seething inside. "She's passionate about what she does," he replied, trying to sound composed. The colleague chuckled. "Well, passion seems to run in the family, except she's the one with the credibility." The words stung, and Jake left the event early, his confidence in tatters. Vanessa's exit from Jake's life was swift and unapologetic. After the investors' dinner, her texts became fewer and her excuses for avoiding him more frequent. One evening, Jake called her, hoping to repair their relationship, but her tone was cold. "Jake, let's not pretend this is anything more than it was," Vanessa said bluntly. "You're a great business contact, but I can't be dragged down by your mess. I have my own image to protect." Her words cut deeper than Jake expected. For the first time, he felt the emptiness of the life he had built. A life of appearances, with no real foundation. The final blow came when Emily was invited to give a keynote speech at a high-profitable charity gala. The event was attended by many of the same investors and industry leaders Jake had worked with, making it impossible for him to ignore. Jake sat in the audience, his heart heavy as he watched Emily take the stage. Her speech was powerful and heartfelt, recounting her journey and the struggles she overcame to make a difference in her community. As she spoke, the audience was captivated, rising to their feet in applause at the end. Emily's words resonated deeply, her authenticity and integrity shining in stark contrast to Jake's carefully curated persona. One investor leaned toward Jake and said, "You married an incredible woman. Too bad you didn't realize it sooner." At home that night, Jake stared at an empty seat at the dinner table. The silence, deafening. The cracks in his life were no longer cracks. They were irreparable fractures. At home that night, Jake stared at an empty seat at the dinner table. The silence deafening. The cracks in his life were no longer cracks. They were irreparable fractures. Emily, meanwhile, sat in her own space, feeling a sense of liberation and closure. Her journey had been painful, but it had led her to rediscover her own worth. And as the night faded, Jake finally admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for so long. He had lost Emily, and with her, he had lost the best part of himself. Jake's carefully crafted life was collapsing, piece by piece. The investors' trust in him had eroded, his colleagues were beginning to doubt his credibility, and his private world was a hollow shell. Each day he tried to hold onto the image he had built, but the cracks were now impossible to ignore. The final blow came when Jake received a call from Mr. Carlton. "Jake, we've made our decision regarding the deal," Mr. Carlton said. Jake straightened in his chair, forcing a confident tone. "I understand there have been some concerns, but I can assure you," Mr. Carlton interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "It's not just about the numbers, Jake. We've decided to move forward with the partnership, but we've made a few adjustments. Your wife, Emily, will lead the community engagement initiatives for the project. Her authenticity and values align perfectly with our vision." Jake froze. The deal he had poured his heart into was no longer under his control. "Emily," he said, barely masking his shock. "Yes, Jake," Mr. Carlton continued. "She's an extraordinary woman. It's clear her work has made a real impact. We look forward to working with her, and we trust you'll support her as she steps into this role." The call ended, leaving Jake reeling. The investors had essentially sidelined him, handing the spotlight to the very person he had dismissed and undervalued. Jake's personal life fared no better. Vanessa, who had been avoiding him since the dinner, finally made her departure official. She sent a curt message. "Jake, I think it's time we go our separate ways. This arrangement isn't working for me anymore. Best of luck." There was no apology, no explanation, just a clean break. Jake stared at the message, his ego bruised. Vanessa had been nothing more than an illusion, a reflection of the life he wanted but could never truly have. Jake decided to confront Emily. He needed answers, though he wasn't entirely sure what he hoped to accomplish. He found her in her home office, reviewing documents for her nonprofit's latest project. She looked up briefly, her expression calm but distant. "Emily," he began, his voice softer than usual. I didn't know Carlton's team had reached out to you." Emily's eyes met his, her gaze steady. "Why would you? You've been too busy building a life I'm not part of." Her words cut deep, and Jake struggled to respond. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "I let my ambition get in the way, but I want to fix this. Fix us." Emily sighed, setting her papers aside. "Jake, this isn't about fixing us. This is about you finally seeing what you've become. You didn't just push me away. You pushed away everything real in your life for the sake of an image." Jake tried to speak, but Emily continued. "I'm not angry anymore, Jake. I'm not even hurt. I've found my own strength, and I'm proud of what I've built. But I've also realized that I don't need to wait for you to catch up. I'm moving forward, with or without you." Jake left the room, feeling the weight of his regrets pressing down on him. For the first time, he fully grasped the enormity of what he had lost. Emily wasn't just his wife. She had been his anchor, the person who believed in him when no one else did. He returned to his office, sitting in silence, as the memories of their early days flooded his mind. The laughter, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the way Emily had always been his biggest supporter. It all felt like a lifetime ago. Jake's life continued its downward spiral as the full weight of his actions came crashing down. The investor's decision to prioritize Emily over him was only the beginning. What he once thought was a minor disruption had turned into a public spectacle, with whispers about his personal life circulating in the very circles he worked so hard to impress. While Jake's world fell apart, Emily's star continued to rise. Her partnership with the investor's philanthropic initiatives gained national attention, leading to interviews and speaking engagements. Her story of perseverance and dedication resonated with audiences, inspiring countless people. During one interview, the host asked, "Emily, how do you stay so grounded, despite all the success you've achieved?" Emily smiled warmly. "It's about staying true to who you are, and remembering why you started in the first place. Success isn't about the spotlight. It's about making a difference." Jake watched the interview alone in his living room, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. Emily's quiet strength and humility were everything he had lost in himself. As if Jake's humiliation wasn't enough, Vanessa dealt him a final, public blow. At a networking event, she openly mocked him while chatting with mutual acquaintances. "Jake? Oh, we had a professional connection," she said with a laugh. "But I'm not in the business of sticking around when someone's house of cards starts falling." Her words quickly spread through the industry, cementing Jake's reputation as a man whose ego had sabotaged both his personal and professional life. The ultimate humiliation came when Emily was invited to speak at a gala celebrating influential leaders in philanthropy. The event was attended by many of Jake's former colleagues and clients. As Emily took the stage, the room fell silent, captivated by her presence. She spoke passionately about her work, the lessons she had learned, and the importance of integrity in all aspects of life. Without mentioning Jake by name, her words cut deep. True success isn't about what you achieve alone. It's about how you lift others up along the way. And sometimes, we have to let go of what no longer serves us to truly thrive. The audience erupted in applause while Jake sat in the back of the room, invisible and forgotten. Jake left the event early, unable to bear the weight of his failure. As he walked the empty streets of the city, he reflected on everything he had lost: Emily's love, his professional reputation, and the sense of purpose he once had. For the first time, he admitted the truth to himself. His downfall wasn't the fault of the investors, Vanessa, or even Emily. It was his own ego and ambition that had brought him to this point. Jake's days blurred together as the weight of his losses bore down on him. His once vibrant office was now a sterile space devoid of energy, and the calls from clients and investors became scarce. He avoided social events entirely, unwilling to face the pitying looks or whispered judgments. One evening, he finally broke down and called Emily. He wasn't sure why, perhaps for closure, or maybe because deep down, he still hoped for forgiveness. Emily answered after a few rings, her voice calm but distant. "Jake?" "I needed to hear your voice," he admitted. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything." There was a long pause before Emily replied, "Jake, I've moved forward. I hope you can too." Her words weren't harsh. They were simply the truth. Jake felt the finality in them, and though it hurt, he understood. Emily's life blossomed as she continued to expand her nonprofit and inspire others. She found fulfillment in her work and built meaningful relationships with people who valued her. Jake finally accepted that his old life was gone. He sold his luxury apartment, stepped down from his executive role, and moved to a quieter neighborhood outside the city. The bustling world he had once fought so hard to dominate felt meaningless now. Months later, Jake found himself at a local cafe, quietly sipping his coffee, when he noticed a familiar face walk past the window. It was Emily, laughing with friends. She looked radiant, free, and content in a way he hadn't seen in years. Jake didn't approach her. Instead, he watched from a distance, allowing himself to savor the moment without interrupting her peace. In that fleeting glimpse, he saw the woman she had always been, the one he had overlooked until it was too late. As Jake walked away, he whispered to himself, "She deserved better." And so did I. In the end, Jake learned the harsh truth. Redemption isn't always about winning someone back. It's about accepting responsibility, learning from mistakes, and moving forward, even if it means facing life alone. Meanwhile, Emily's story continued to unfold, filled with purpose and joy. She had not only survived betrayal, she had thrived, proving that the strongest endings come from reclaiming your power. Thanks for watching.